I was standing at the sink, rinsing rice in a plastic colander, when every phone in the building screamed at once, and the light over our table went out with a soft pop and a thread of black smoke. The municipal alert pushed itself onto the lock screen. Shelter where you are, avoid contact, emergency medical disruption, and somewhere down on Detroit Avenue a siren cut sideways through the street noise and made my knuckles slick under the faucet. I turned the water off, listened for one long second to decide if that siren was moving toward us or away, then said, "Shoes now," because I didn't have a better first sentence for the night. Malik dropped his pencil and looked at me like maybe I was starting one of my drills again. I said it a second time, and he went to the door, quiet like I taught him, and laced up sitting on the mat, because we don't track street dirt past that line. We live on the second floor of a narrow 3-flat in Lakewood, west of Cleveland proper, with the kind of old wood stairs that complain if a squirrel goes past the window. October wind pushed at the kitchen window and flicked the blind cord against the cracked paint. I killed the gas on the stove and covered the pot, so the heat would stay in the rice. The neighborhood smells of damp leaves and car exhaust when it's cold. That night it also smelled like somebody left a soldering iron on, that sour electric edge you get right before something fails. I moved through the apartment, front door, deadbolt, chain. Bar I made from a length of closet rod and 2 angle brackets. Back door to the fire escape, deadbolt, and the broom handle I cut to length that wedges between door and fridge. Window latches down. Bathroom door open, so we can get to the tub. If you work building maintenance like I do, you get used to counting your route through a space by touch and hinge and reach. It keeps your hands busy while your head runs ahead and finds the next 3 problems. We still had power in the hall. The stair light hummed. I took a breath to see if I heard voices. Instead, I heard Carlos downstairs shouting, "Lock it, lock it, lock it," and something heavy hitting his door like a man trying to shoulder through without knowing how to put his weight into it. I hate that sound. A door can hold more than a man if the load is right, but you've got to respect what's on the other side of a piece of wood, especially if it isn't thinking in a way that uses pain as a brake. I grabbed my kit bag from the hall closet canvas, zipper repaired with fishing line, a patch from the community college I used to work for before the cuts, and set it on the kitchen table. Inside, a 22-ounce framing hammer with the claw ground a little sharper than code would like, 8-inch crescent wrench, contractor tape, 3-pack of nitrile gloves, 2 D-cell flashlights with electrical tape around the jaws, so if they smack something they won't ring, headlamp with elastic half-shot, for AS in a marked Ziploc, a fixed blade knife with a cracked plastic sheath, 2 N95 masks left from COVID that I kept when everyone else stopped wearing them, a half roll of duct tape, and 1 vacuum-sealed pack of jerky. Lower shelf, 2 liters of water in ugly reused bottles, half a bag of rice, beans, and a jar of peanut butter. We had 3 burner lighters with long necks because I fix other people's stoves for a living and stock up when they go on sale. I believed, up to that minute, in small normal problems and my own capacity to solve them, which is my pride and also my flaw. Dead chew at the back of my head. Left knee clicks when it's damp, and I don't like tight spaces I can't map. That's all ordinary. The siren down on Detroit Avenue cut off like somebody hit a switch. I don't like when a noise stops mid-breath. I pulled Malik toward the bathroom and turned on the cold tap. "The tub, Dad," he said, and I could tell he was trying to read if I was running one of my paranoia rehearsals, or if this time the wires were live. "Fill it," I said. "If the mains go weird, we have what we have." To his credit, he didn't ask. He just climbed in with his shoes and popped the drain stopper down with his heel. I set the headlamp on the counter pointed at the wall, so we had light without glare. Next, I texted my sister. Signal held. I told her to stay put. Doors locked. Text me when she got the alert. She wrote back, "Are you serious?" And then, okay. That little okay was the last casual thing I got from anyone that week. From the stairs came a sound like a tire dragging over gravel, and then a door latch snicked and would popped and Carlos swore. Not like a man yelling, but like a man taking inventory of the damage while he did the work. "Stay," I told Malik, and I cracked the apartment door and put my ear into the gap. Our stair runs straight down to a short hallway and then out to the street. On the small landing between first and second floor, There's a window that shows you the maple tree we never got the landlord to trim right. The hall light shines down past that window, and it makes a kind of glow on the front steps. In that light, I saw a shadow where there shouldn't be one, and then a hand, pale and wrong at the edges, feeling the wall like it was tasting the paint with its fingers. Behind the hand, someone making a sound like a straw pulling at the last of a drink. I grew up around enough drunks to know that sound too well. This wasn't that. It didn't have the rhythm. It didn't breathe like a person trying to recover. We call these things zombies now because we need a bucket for panic to pour into. But standing in my own stairwell, I didn't think of the word. I thought of mold, of something that grows wherever the light doesn't reach. And I thought of weight and leverage. The thing's weight, my leverage. I closed and latched and set the bar across our door and slid the knife out of its cracked sheath. The steel had a chip in the belly where I hit a staple in a joist once. I'm right-handed, but I held the knife in my left, hammer in my right, because the hammer is the first instrument you hand a problem. I took 3 slow breaths, my son could hear them, and said, if it's a person, I'll use the wrench. If it's not, I'll use the hammer. And that was nonsense, but it was a thing to tell myself. Carlos below shouted again, a short, sharp no. And then something thumped to the floor in his place. That wasn't a body falling, because a fallen person has meat tone, and this was like a sack of wet clothes. Then, incredibly stupid, the low battery chirp from our smoke detector over the stove sounded off, just that tiny beep. And the hand at the landing jerked its fingers, like it recognized a pattern and wanted to be close to it. The beeps are every 30 seconds when the battery's dying. The detector above the stair is old, wired, and also chirps a test tone when the power dips. It did that right then. The head in the shadows lifted, and I knew the shape of the head, like you know a neighbor by silhouette. The face caught a sliver of light. The angle of the mouth was wrong. The eyes were looking for math. I hate that in emergencies I still think in lists. But it saved us. I grabbed a dining chair, put my back to the door, and climbed on the seat, then smacked the detector with an open palm until my fingers found the twist lock and got it off its mount. I dug my thumb under the battery latch and tore the 9-volt out. The chirp died. Downstairs, the thing looked back toward Carlos's door, where I could hear a repeating thud, thud, glide, thud, like a head searching for a latch with bone. The stair glow showed me 2 more arrivals on the sidewalk. One had that same slow angle to its neck, and it turned its face toward where my beep had been like a compass needle remembering its purpose. It didn't care about the sound of the chair legs rasping on tile. Didn't care about me breathing. It wanted the pattern. That was the first rule I learned. That repetition pulls them. A single bang will make them twitch and sniff, but a heartbeat, a metronome, a drip, a beep, those pull like a string. I tested it. Testing is what my hands do when my head can't take another theory. I opened the drawer, pulled a metal spoon, and dropped it onto the tile from shoulder height. The spoon clanged once and skittered under the radiator. The 3 on the sidewalk turned their heads a fraction and then forgot me and moved toward somewhere else where an alarm was starting up. Down on the street, 2 cars across from our building had bumped while their owner scrambled, and a horn stuck on was doing that aggressive continuous wail that would have pissed me off any other week. The 3 on the sidewalk hesitated, then turned not to the horn but toward a store 2 doors down where a UPS backup must have been screaming in 10-second pulses. They liked the beat, not the volume. I filed it into the part of my head where I keep the ways to make a stubborn bold turn without shearing it. Then I breathed and remembered I had a kid in the bathroom, filling the tub to the overflow line because I taught him we don't waste. Carlos's door cracked, splinters popping. I took the bar off our door, slid the chain, and opened just enough to talk without letting our warm air out. Carlos, I called low. You alive? Yeah, he gasped, and he sounded far away. It's Tomas. Don't open. He's not. He. The thud stopped and Carlos started the sign of the cross, and I heard him hit the wall as he moved away from his door. Then down on the sidewalk someone screamed in a way that made my wrists go hot because I knew there was choice inside that scream instead of reflex. And then that sound cut too. I put the bar back on, set the chair under it for wedge, and went to the bathroom. Shut it, I told Malik, and he did. and we stood there for a second listening to water drumming into itself. I turned off the toilet line, because if the mains go it'll try to refill and call noise to itself with that phantom hiss. I handed him gloves. "Bag what you want most," I said. He looked at his baseball glove and then put it down. He took his inhaler, his school picture of his mom and him at the zoo 2 years ago, where the sun makes her squint, and the pack of cards his uncle left that still smell like cigarette smoke from the garage where they played. We moved through the apartment, making it small. That's all you do in a place when you need it to hold. Make it small and quiet. I killed the fridge. I pulled the long couch away from the window, so if glass came in it wouldn't cut where we sit. I rolled up the rug under the coffee table and set it against the door to eat the noise of a footstep near the wood. Malik put batteries and the headlamp in the bag without me telling him. Good kid. I took the pot of parboiled rice off the stove and dumped it into a Tupperware and shoved the hot pot into the freezer so it wouldn't call to itself with a little ping as it cooled. It surprised me, in that hour, how many of my own habits were designed to prevent exactly what was happening without me ever naming it. You live tight. You learn the hinge pins on your doors and where your neighbor's floorboards squeak. You pay attention. You keep a flashlight in the paper bag with the spare trash liners. You put your tools where you can reach them in the dark. You don't leave metronomes running because you don't own a metronome. By 8, Detroit Avenue sounded like somebody tearing a sheet and not stopping. Sirens rose and fell and cut again. I heard a snowplow, a real one, with the V-blade and the chain clattering on the back, and it bulldozed 2 cars aside at the corner like they were toys and made a clear lane, and then got itself stuck on a fire hydrant nobody had seen as the fog coming off the lake laid down denser. I didn't want to be in the apartment when the first hard attempt came at our door. We had 2 options: fire escape to the alley, or front stairs past Carlos's door and down to the street. The alley has a gate to the sidewalk, and I stuck a wedge in it last summer because the latch sags. If I had 5 minutes with a drill and a bolt, I could make it behave. I didn't have 5 minutes, and I didn't want my son walking a metal fire escape that would ring like a triangle if he misstepped. So street, then west to the municipal parking garage, where our Corolla sleeps under a leak that drops onto the hood and leaves a scale of minerals. We pack for weight. 1 bag, the good canvas. Knife on my belt in its cracked sheath. Hammer in my right hand because grip plus habit equals less chance of missing. Wrench in the bag. 2 D-cells and 1 headlamp clipped to the strap because you can find a battery blind by touch if it's where it belongs. 2 liters of water. Half the rice, jerky, peanut butter. 3 plastic spoons for garbage bags. The N95S. A small bottle of bleach I keep for cleaning mold under sinks. I would have brought the whole bucket if I could carry it and still move. I left the photo albums because paper weighs more than memory when you need to climb. We stepped into the stair, and it felt like a church when everyone knows the priest is lying. You can smell fear if you've ever worked a night shift in a big building. It smells like sweat held in and plastic and the little dry tick a mouth makes when it's going to ask for help. Our stair had all of that plus the cough syrup sweet iron of blood. The landing window showed the maple's branches moving in a wind that wasn't making any sound. 2 doors below, Carlos's and the empty first floor that was between tenants. The empty one had a real deadbolt, but no chain. The first floor window had the "For Rent" sign taped crooked inside it, and someone's hand had smeared it from outside like they tried to read it with their palm. "It's okay," I lied to my son. He put his small hand in the back of my jacket and kept it there like a hook. We went down halfway. The light above the stair had been knocked crooked, and its chain rattled against the brass shade with a tick that was almost, but not, regular. That almost regularity is safe, I told myself. The beeps are not. The first floor door creaked. The latch plate had torn free of the jamb and hung by 1 screw. My knee ached as I put weight into the step. I hate stairs when I don't know what weight's at the top or bottom. The hall had a choke point at the mailboxes, where the wall jogs and so the landlord could pretend he solved a space problem with molding. I could use that if I had to. I slowed to listen. From inside Carlos's apartment, nothing. From the empty unit, a breath that wasn't a person checking to see if he was loud. I breathed back slow into the N95, and let the paper flutter inside the mask, and tried to see the grain of the door wood instead of whatever my head was offering. I needed a test. I tapped the wrench against the radiator. Once, hard. Something inside paused, and then forgot me. I tapped it again, slow. Count to 4 again, count to 4 again. On the third one, the breath inside came closer. Okay. Rule number 1, repeating pulls. I slid past on the balls of my feet and held my hammer low, because an overhead swing shows you to the thing and tires the shoulder. Better to use the short, hard, framing swing if the target is at face height and close. The front door was 2 long steps away. The street was not the street we had lived on that morning. You could walk from our building to the barber's 2 blocks down and pass 5 small problems and 1 larger one. We trade those problems around like baseball cards, and they mostly belong to the same men, and that's life in a city. What I saw was that life taken by the shoulders and shaken. You know how it is when the first snow falls in October and people forget how to drive? Like that, but angry. Too low. Dark shapes on the asphalt that looked like trash bags until they didn't. A streak of something I didn't want to name that ended at the curb. A woman's shoe, nice leather, lying on its side in the leaf gutter as if it had thought about something else and stepped out of the moment. The sound I tried not to hear was the UPS backup near the cell phone store bleeding its heart out. 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. There were shapes in the store windows moving toward that pulse like old men at the county fair going to see what song the organ player was about to do next. We moved west, hugging the building. I kept my body between my son and the street and told him, if we had to run, we go to the alley and use the dumpsters as cover because plastic eats sound. He knows what cover is. I taught him with Nerf darts when he was 6, and we played War Inside on rainy days. My boy, who I named after my grandfather because I believe in people as structures you build, not the names they wear, kept his chin tucked like a catcher blocking the plate. He didn't ask where his mother was. He knows she is 2 states away, and that we talk when the job she works lets her, and that sometimes love looks like logistics. At the corner, one of them had stopped and turned in a slow circle like he was a satellite whose dish was trying to lock onto a signal. He was wearing a mail carrier's hoodie, but not the shorts, so I guess he'd been at home. The hoodie was dark with something that wasn't rain. He turned toward us once, smelled the space we were in with an open mouth, and turned away because the phone store's 10-second heart found him again. I angled us behind the maple, and then the mural on the deli wall, and then the newspaper box, and then we were at the door to the garage, and the keypad for the pedestrian gate was lit a sick green, and for the first time in 2 years, I couldn't remember the code. It happens like that when there's too much information, and your hands are full, and your kid is breathing too fast, and the October cold makes your scar tissue sing. I pulled my glove off with my teeth, and forced my hand to move slow. Bahrain. That's the trick. Think of the number as a word. The code is a word. I punched it that way. The lock hummed, then clicked, and the push bar gave like a sigh. Inside the garage, the air is a different temperature because the concrete holds what the sun gave it through the day. It smelled like rubber and a little like piss because somebody uses the far corner as a bathroom, and we all look the other way. The emergency lights were on, fuzzy yellow, and the ceiling height drops by a foot at the far end where they ran the sprinkler line after the fact. I held the door so it didn't slap and let it ease back into its frame. The sound of the street dropped away, and I could hear something else. A car alarm on the 2nd level, slow and steady, the kind that changes from whoop to honk to beep in a pattern. I should have thought of that before, but there are always 3 choices fighting for first place in your head on a night like that. And if you pick one, you lose the other 2 on purpose. That alarm was pulling them inside. I didn't want that, but I could use it. Our Corolla sat halfway back on the 1st level, under a stain on the ceiling where calcium and dirt form a false stalactite. The car alarm was not ours, but I had a horn, and a single honk in one direction might pull eyes, while a repeating alarm in another might pull bodies. I told Malik to stay 10 steps behind me, and if I broke, he ran to the stairwell and went to level 3, because that's where the fire door can latch if you kick the wedge free. He nodded. My son never nods without thinking. He does it when a thing is already loaded into his next move. We went low, we went slow, and at the next concrete pillar, I peered around like a man who still has both eyes and would like to keep it that way. Two of them were in the garage already. They'd found a service door propped by a cone, and their shoes made that wet slap I will hear later, in dreams, when I wish I didn't. One was under an old Buick with his face against the oil pan, taking in the world through metal like a man who believed he could crawl inside of a heartbeat if he just tried hard enough. The other was upright near the stairwell door, hand against the glass, waiting. The car alarm upstairs cycled to that high, short beep that sounded like a pager from the 90s, and both of them parted from what they were doing and turned their bodies toward the sound with that slow, learning motion I hated. They don't rush. People rush. Those things adjust. Movement draws eyes more than words do. I kept my shoulders inside the pillar and flicked my wrist to roll a socket from my pocket into the open. I carry that socket because it fits a lot of fastener heads on one of the HVAC units at the college. It turned once, twice, quiet, then bumped against the expansion joint. Both of them twitched their eyes to the motion and then forgot it because the alarm upstairs told them a story. The one at the glass put his forehead against it and left a smear that wasn't all from the outside of him. I breathed out and said, "We move," because we had to move sometime and I trusted my legs more than the alarm. At the Corolla, I opened the passenger side, first to keep my body between the car and the room while Malik slid in. The cabin smelled like old fries and the slow leak of the heater core that I've been meaning to fix. I handed him the 2-liter and the headlamp and told him to put one bottle under the seat and clip the lamp on the sun visor. I popped the trunk and took inventory of what I'd been good enough to stash for hurricane season, even though Lake Erie doesn't care about hurricanes. One fleece blanket, one pair of leatherwork gloves, a small tool bag with a ratchet set, electrical tape, a spare headlamp, and thank God, a pack of AA batteries still sealed, a tarp, 4 bungee cords, a gallon of water in a brittle plastic jug that wobbled when I handled it like it was tired of being held, one old road flare, a can of Fix-A-Flat, a stale bag of chips that had the smell of the inside of the car baked into the oil, in the wheel well, the tire iron and the jack I haven't touched since the time we picked up a screw by the ball field. I took the iron. It has reach and weight. I slid the tarp out and folded it so it looked smaller and lighter than it is. That's a trick from carrying sheetrock upstairs. You fold your work to trick your balance. Upstairs, the alarm changed pattern. Some alarms do that to keep your brain from ignoring them, which is smart for people and bad for nights like this. The two in the garage jerked like they'd found a new north. I looked at the stairwell door they were near, thought about the fact that a fire door wants to latch if you let it, and that a cinder block can prop it just as well as a cone. I had no cinder block. I had a son who could move lightly and a father who needed to do something just once that made the night simpler. "Count to 30, I told Malik. "If I'm not back, you take the keys from the visor and you go to level 3 fire door and you stay there where the alarm is loudest, and you throw this." I put the road flare in his hand. "You don't light it unless you get it outside. If you light it inside, we burn the air we need." He didn't like this plan. I didn't either. He opened his mouth and closed it. I hate that I counted with him in my head as I moved, because I knew he would count, and I wanted to be inside his effort with my own. I cut low around the next car, then the next, holding the tire iron by the short end, so the long end stayed close and wouldn't trip me. The one at the glass lifted his head and said a sound my mind translated as "there." But it wasn't a word. The one under the Buick pulled himself out by his elbows, and his nails squeaked on concrete. Under the alarm above, I let my steps fall into the gaps, so I wasn't laying a metronome down. At the last pillar, I paused. The door hinge set check side out with the pin showing. A cheap contractor special. One hit up, one hit down, the pin spins, and the door loses its best friend. But I didn't have time for that work or the leverage without alerting them. What I had was a wedge and a heavy thing. I swung once slow into the base of the cone and set it skittering. The door sighed its weight into the frame and latched. The one at the glass stared at his reflection like a dog that's never seen himself before. I stepped back into the pillar's shadow so he'd forget me the way he forgets everything that isn't consistent, and I moved my feet in a pattern that was not a pattern because I had learned that rule. I trusted that rule enough to stake a breath on it. I made it back to the Corolla on count 27 by my measure. Malik's hands were white on the flare. The alarm upstairs changed again, mercifully inconsistent, and I filed that for later. We backed out with the lights off. I hate driving without headlights, but light makes a line for a hungry mind to follow, and I wasn't going to draw that line if I could help it. In the street, we kept to 20 because speed draws attention, and the weather was turning to that lake fog that puts light into a solid wall. At the second intersection, a city bus stood half into the box, with its hazards clicking like a pulse. I didn't want to go past it because it made a blind corner. I went anyway, and I kept a horn link between us and the curb because you never know what's sleeping behind a trash barrel. On the radio, I picked up nothing but a loop telling me to go online to a site the city uses during snow parking bans. The site was down. We drove west because the wind off the lake moves noise toward the east, and we needed a little quiet to think. 10 minutes, and we were by the rail tracks, the crossing arms locked down, and a freight train dead in the crossing like it had given up a mile from where someone loved it. The parking lot beside the transit depot was lit up with portable floodlights, and a few dozen people stood near the bus doors, moving their hands, but not making much noise. A man with a safety vest and a whistle around his neck stood on a plastic pallet and waved everyone into lanes like it was a county fair. I hate crowds, but a crowd sometimes means water and a place to trade your labor for a hot cup and an update, and I needed all three. My knee was stiff. Malik needed to pee. I needed to stop pretending we were going to ride this out in our car like we were waiting out a thunderstorm. We were waved into a line for intake. The man with the vest had a cleanup rag tucked into his belt and kept touching the whistle like it gave him comfort. He had colored fabric strips in a tub at his feet, red, green, blue, and he tied them on wrists without looking at faces. Green sleeps, blue works, red medical. He told us without asking what we could do, and then his eyes passed over me and came back because he saw the way I held myself and the hammer at my hip, and he said, "You know anything about generators?" "I keep a building alive," I said, which was true enough. "Blue," he said, and tied one on me. He tied a green one on Malik. I didn't like that our colors didn't match, but I liked less the idea of arguing in a line. He blew the whistle once in a pattern that made me want to grab it and bite through the reed. "Whistle codes," he said, patting it. 1 short gather, 2 move, 3 quiet. He mimed the third instead of blowing it, and I loved him for that tiny smart mercy. Quiet hours begin at 9. No flashlights in the open after that. We've got a bus bay and some dividers, a med table. No running. Women and kids on the south side, workers east. A woman with a red strip took Malik's temperature with one of those scanners that feels like a toy and points at your forehead. 98, she said, and her voice made me think of teachers who keep too much inside for the job. "He's fine." I said nothing about the whistle. The man needed the shape of his rules more than he needed my new little science lesson that repetition pulls the bad in. But I kept that lesson in my mouth like a toothpick. I will die on a hill for a rule that keeps my kid alive. I won't die on a hill to win an argument on the first night. Inside the depot, the tiles felt clean under my feet even though 100 strangers had stood on them, and we all carried the day in on our shoes. The ticket counter was now a triage table. The benches were pushed to the walls to make space for mats. A set of colored tarps had been hung from the columns to make lanes, and a woman with a short haircut and a Garden District sweatshirt counted us, as if numbers could keep us all in the same story. She offered us water in small cups to save the gallon jugs. A signboard had rules hastily taped to it, an oath shouting, "No groups of more than 4 outside. No strobes, no music. Show wristband for toilets." The last one made me smile in spite of everything, because even at the end of things, there's someone guarding the bathroom like it's gold. Blue meant work. A boy named Jay with a buzz cut that looked like his dad did it handed me a clipboard and pointed me at a double door to the back, where they'd parked a portable generator on a trailer. The air back there had a taste to it, diesel and warm metal, and something sweeter I didn't like. The generator chugged low and steady, which I liked because steady sound in one place might mask other sounds if you kept it consistent and didn't layer another pattern on top. A man in a fedora that only a stubborn man wears was bent over the fuel line with a wrench that was too small. He looked up like we were a problem he'd been promised and hadn't wanted. "Intake line's got air," he said. "She coughs when she feels like it." "Does she have a name?" I said. "June," he said, and I let that sit because men who name their machines are good to their machines. I told him we'd bleed the line, and I swapped his too small wrench for my crescent. I put my hand on June like you do a dog who wants to bolt, and I listened. She was pulling air around a clamp. I tightened that clamp, and then I cracked a small bleeder and watched for bubbles. He tried to talk to me about sports or anything else that would stave off the question in both our heads about why we were keeping lights for strangers going when maybe the sensible thing was darkness. We bled June until she ran smoother, and then I told the Garden District woman that the carbon monoxide would pool if we weren't careful. She nodded and said, "We'll crack the loading bay doors a foot." And I did the math on heat loss and decided people would wear their coats. Quiet hours at 9 meant lullaby without singing. We slept between concrete pillars with our backs against the wall. Malik had the blanket and the hood of my jacket, and I had my hammer under my thigh where I could forget it until my hand wanted it. Someone snored. Someone cried into a sleeve. A child murmured things that made his parents stroke his hair. I was asleep and awake in a way you get when you've had to be responsible for someone too young to protect himself for long enough that your body knows the sound of that child choking and can wake without thought. At some point in the first turn of the night, a whistle blew. 2 short bursts, and I sat up with my fists and said no, in a voice that wasn't loud but had volume inside it. The man with the vest put his hands up like he was asking to come aboard. "That was to move," he said. "We do it every 60. Every 60. I closed my eyes. "No," I said again. "Stop that. Use hands. Use lights. 60 will bring them right down our throats." He looked hurt. I told him the rule I'd learned. He said they needed a way to coordinate without shouting, and I agreed with that. But I told him to randomize his whistles, change them, skip beats, and for the love of God never make them like a metronome. He said he'd think about it. He blew once, short an apology, and I listened for the street and didn't hear any new hunger rising. Maybe we got away with it that time. Morning didn't arrive on a schedule. The depot grew paler, and someone in the corner heated a pot of water on a camping stove, and we all smelled the instant coffee and leaned toward it with our noses. I traded a half roll of duct tape for a strong cup and felt no guilt about it. That's barter. Malik got a plastic bowl of oats from a woman who said her church made it. I didn't ask which church. We watched the doors and tried to count the minutes between farther sirens. There were fewer. Fewer sirens means fewer responses or more quiet, and this quiet felt like the bad side of that math. A man came in at 10 with his left palm duct taped shut and the tape sucked in at the center with blood. He said he tripped and caught himself on a fence. I didn't like the cut. It had a tooth to it. The red band woman cleaned it and set him near the warmest part of the depot. The man stared at the floor and kept his teeth together even when she poured water over the wound. He said his name was Nate and that he worked out at the water treatment plant and that no one was answering the phone out there. He said something else then. Said the plant smelled like it had in August when there was a chemical spill upriver and the water office told everyone to boil their tap. "Chlorine over the normal," he said, like a man who didn't know how to say, "My whole place smells like a pool," in city worker language. That made me think. Bleach is a smell that overrides every other smell in your nose. He said he'd walked past 2 of them by the tracks without them turning, like the smell had put a blanket over him. He said when he got to Detroit Avenue the wind shifted, and one looked at him like it was trying to solve a problem. The whistle man wanted him to stay. I wanted to try a thing. Rule number 2 wasn't a rule yet. It was an idea that the right chemical stink could hide a human, a parasite that rides the parts of the brain that used to mean food there. If that's what this is, might look for a certain exhalation or a certain warm water smell. I'm not a doctor. I fix other people's broken handles and hinges. But I know what happens when you put too much bleach in a mop bucket. The air gets thin and the back of your throat does a 2-step. If a thing is trying to sniff me in the middle of that cloud, it has to work harder. We had to get water, real water, not sips from jugs. If we were going to stay in the depot for 2 nights, toilets needed it. People needed to drink. The whistle man called a meeting at the pallet and did not blow the whistle. He counted out 8 volunteers, no kids, no one from the red band because they were triage, and blue was me. We take the bus, he said, because the doors are solid and we can carry more on the way back. He passed around fabric masks, the cheap ones that keep insulation fibers out of your mouth, and a set of old swim goggles with scuffed lenses. We don't know what this is, he said, and I loved him for saying, we don't know, instead of making a story to keep us calm. We go to the plant with the man who works there and we see. We went. I set Malik with the Garden District woman and told him he would stay with her and not volunteer for anything, and that if I didn't make it back he would go to Andy's when the roads opened and show her the move with the broom handle for the door, and he said, okay, like a boy who knew that adults like plans even when those plans were paper. He didn't cry. He has a stubborn face when he decides he won't cry. I kissed his head and pretended to crack a joke about the coffee tasting like nails, and he laughed in the way kids laugh when they want to give you the gift of pretending. The bus smelled like old foam and diesel history, and for a moment that smell felt like church because it was a known thing. Windows up, doors closed, we rolled slow, with the driver doing that careful school bus move at corners that keeps the nose from dipping at a bad angle. The city had put salt on the roads for decades, and the asphalt remembered it. Cracks and patches made a rumble at 20 that made the windows chatter. We passed a jackknifed box truck at the bottom of a ramp where a tunnel got low and tight, and I thought about making a bridge across jammed cars with it. But that was the kind of plan you make when you aren't responsible for anyone. In the alley behind the old mattress store, 2 of them stood with their hands touching the fence. We made eye contact. They did not follow. The driver streaked the horn once, which was not good, but it was better than laying on it, which would have been lethal. The 2 at the fence turned their heads and then went back to touching the chain link because wind and sirens far off told them a longer story. At the plant, the air had that pool bleach tang. The chain gate was open because who was going to close it, and the parking lot was empty except for a city pickup with the door open and a laborer's jacket on the seat. The intake channel by the riverside churned brown-green and threw up a mist that bit the eyes. Nate showed us the way in. A maintenance door I would have loved under normal days. One of those solid core models with a good closer and a lock that turns confidently, slab-sided and square like a shoulder. Inside, the hum of machinery was steady and deep, like a man with a big chest inhaling in his sleep. I loved it. Something about that constant sound was a foundation you could build carefully on. We made a perimeter, which is a fancy way of saying we shut the doors we could shut, and marked with tape the hall we'd walk more than twice, so anyone who came after us would follow clean. Catwalks made of galvanized steel crossed a big basin where water sat white with bubbles. The chlorine tanks were caged on the far wall like big green torpedoes. The smell was stronger there, and I put my mask up and let the filter do something, anything, even if that something was giving my body the idea that it was being helpful. On the basin floor, something moved. Not a lot. Shifts. The kind people do when they're asleep and trying to get away from a dream. 2 of them lay where, I guessed. They had fallen over a handrail or jumped to chase some beeping that wouldn't stop. Every so often one twitched as if a message from one part of him was trying to cross into another part and finding no wires. They didn't look up. I counted heartbeats and counted 5 slow ones before I believed they weren't going to. We needed 2 things. Water in containers, and confirmation of the rule about smell. We found blue 55-gallon drums, clean enough, and a hose we could run from a spigot that wasn't loaded with who knows what by the chemical trains. A man from the depot named Kian, broad across the shoulders and polite like someone who had learned to take up less space than he has, found a pallet jack, and we stacked what we could. Then I did a stupid smart thing. I took the small bottle of bleach from my bag, and I poured it onto a rag, and tied that rag around my face under the mask, so the smell would make my eyes sting and my throat think about closing. I told Kian to stand on the catwalk above me with the tire iron and the line from a safety harness we found. If I start to cough hard, I said, you pull me back. He said, you sure? I said no and picked the thing that needed doing anyway. I walked out on the catwalk, toward where the two lay. I let my feet make a noise any person would have heard. Neither moved. The low hum from the machines kept up. I reached the midpoint, and I clanged my wrench on the handrail once, irregular. One of them twitched a shoulder. I banged again, regularly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Both of them lifted their heads like men waking to a song they know. But they didn't see me, didn't orient to me, didn't rise. The bleach was stinging my eyes, and I wanted to cough so bad my ribs burned. I held it. I did one more regular run. 1, 2, 3, 4. Both rolled onto their knees and put their hands to the grated floor like they were listening with their palms. They faced away from me. Toward the wall of chlorinated vapor? No. Toward a small alarm on the floor that blinked and chirped irregularly. And when it chirped twice fast, both turned their heads and then lost interest because it didn't commit to a pattern. I backed out. Kian didn't have to pull me because pride is a useful fuel right up until it kills you. When I got to the platform, I let myself cough because holding it had become its own kind of lie. We loaded drums and got them moving. The bus driver set the rear door to manual, and we ran a hose through so we could fill barrels inside out of the wind and out of the line of sight of anything on the street. While we waited for the drums to reach the line on the side that said full, the whistle man, who had come with us because he didn't know how not to be in charge, decided to set up whistles for relay. One short toot to say stop, and two to say start. He did it at 20-second intervals because that's what his head likes. He is a good man. He is the kind of man who coached youth soccer for years and never shouted except when it counted. I walked over and took the whistle out of his mouth and put it into my pocket, and I told him, as plain as I could, that he had to mix it up or we were going to die. He looked past me at the caged tanks and the two men on their knees below and the blank parking lot beyond the chain link, and he said, without heat, "Okay." He clapped instead. Human hands do not clap with perfect timing unless a metronome rules them. The clap echoed messy and died. Nothing in the basin below lifted its head. On the way back, we went past the big box store because two of the drums needed lids that we didn't have. The back hallway of that store is a place I've been before when I had to talk to the manager about the time their delivery truck bent our downspout, and they said the downspout bent itself. The hallway is long and lined with cage rolling racks and a double-fire door at the end. Kian took point, tire iron in hand, and I took the rear because the rear is where you keep your liars and your saints. And I'm neither. I just don't like someone stepping on my heels when I have a bag on. The woman from Red who came with us, I didn't catch her name. In my head, for myself, I called her Tria, had grabbed a packet of those blue nitrile gloves and taped them over her sleeves to keep her arms from picking up the world. Inside that corridor, I learned the third thing I didn't put a number on until much later. Space with many edges makes noise behave badly. Every squeak of the roll cage echoed, overlapped, and confused even me. The alarm from a forklift charger down the way made a small, regular chirp. The rule started to pull. From the shadow of a stack of flat-pack furniture, a man in a store vest with a name tag that read Devon rotated his head toward the chirp like a bird considering a bug. He had the kind of smear down his front that tells you his day had been worse than he could keep inside his shirt. Kian, bless him, lifted the tire iron in a slow, not threatening arc that told me he knew the math of reach and balance, and he let Devon come to the chirp while we slid past on quiet feet. Devon didn't smell us. We were still carrying the bleach cloud like a cloak. Triage tested it by sticking her arm out from behind a pallet. Devon twitched, then didn't, and then later, when we moved away and she took the glove off because it was tearing, he snapped like a dog at the line of motion, and Kian made a fast decision and hit him once, a sharp chop behind the ear, and Devon folded like a wet fence. We didn't look at his face longer than you look at an old photograph when you have to make dinner on the stove. At the depot, we used the hose and a siphon and filled clean jugs and felt, for 5 minutes, like the kind of people who could hold a small point of civilization because we ran water into cups for children and the whistle man didn't blow his whistle anymore. He used a flashlight under his hand to signal. It made a soft, irregular glow you had to pay attention to. I respected that. I slept in my jacket again to keep my pockets where my hands expected them, and because the concrete floor reached up through the mat, and told my niece stories I didn't need to hear. I slept with my son's hand on my forearm, that little rhythm of touch he has had since he was 4, and I slept with my hammer on my hip. We were not safe, but we were inside rules I understood: sound, smell, line of sight. On the second night, the depot broke. Not because the whistle man lost his nerve or because the drums ran dry. It broke because people do. A man who had been told no at 3 small things since we arrived. No, you can't take 2 blankets. No, you can't stand in the quiet hours aisle and talk on your phone. No, you can't jump the line for the bathroom. Found himself in charge of a north door for an hour while Blue Band slept, and he decided to leave it propped because he needed air. He found a piece of wood to make a wedge. He made the wedge perfect. That door sighed open a handspan, and it breathed like a person does when they finally say what they wanted to say. There had been alarms across the street all day, isolated beeps, but the power cut in the block at 10, and the alarms all settled into their fail-safes and began to sing in rhythm. You could feel the depot lean to that song. The first hand on the door came soft, fingers spread. The second came hard, knocking, and you could pretend it was a person if you needed to. The wedge held as wedges do until the load exceeds the friction you believed in, and then it becomes a vector for failure instead of a friend. The door opened enough that a head could find the gap and see that light hides in the cracks. What's our map? I said to myself, because map beats panic. The depot floor, benches to the sides, tarps making lanes, door at the north with a problem, door to the east going to the loading bay with June humming, south side stacked with the sleepers, west door chained because the city hates lawsuits, choke points, the ticket counter islands, the support columns, and the line of metal turnstiles we dragged to the east to force order for the toilets. I told Malik to go south with Garden District and to get everyone on the floor under the benches and to breathe into their sleeves if they could smell anything sweet or rotten. I didn't know if that mattered, but a sleeve makes you quiet and makes people feel like they're doing something, and that matters. I told the whistle man to stand by June and be ready to cut her if we needed to dark out. He looked like I'd asked him to step on his own dog, but he's a good man and he nodded. He deserves better than the history he will remember for the rest of his life. Kian, who had slept with both boots on, lifted the tire iron and moved to the center to be where he could reach any column in 2 long strides. The door failed the way doors do when they finally decide that their duty is done. The first one wore a bicycle helmet with the chin strap broken, so it clacked against his teeth as he moved. The helmet made his head a harder problem. I didn't go for the head. I went for his shin with the hammer, because bone breaks make bodies fold, and a folded thing is less dangerous. He folded, and Kian, God bless him, stepped forward and put the iron down like a man who has changed a tire in the rain and knows what that swing needs. The second one tried to climb over the ticket counter island like it remembered that being up high feels like power. It caught its knee on the corner and tore. It didn't mind. The third and fourth didn't come straight. They veered and found the tarps and pressed their faces into the fabric like they were smelling the last people who had touched it. The tarp shook. Someone screamed and then put a hand over their own mouth, which is a survival instinct I wish I could teach in 10 minutes to everyone. I stepped back, counting, measuring the room, every new body changing the math. And then the whistle man failed. He didn't blow the whistle. That's not his failure. He saw the bleed of bodies, saw the way the tarps slowed them as the fabric dragged on fingers, and he thought, like a coach, like a man who moves people, one long blast to regroup. He reached for the whistle that wasn't around his neck because I had taken it. He cupped his hands, and he whistled with his mouth the way boys do on fields. Long and steady. The sound cut the diesel hum and laid a line across the air. I saw 5 heads jerk toward him, like he had just told them their favorite word. No, I said to no one, and I cut across the room. I grabbed June's fuel line, and I twisted the bleed I'd installed, the one that would flood her with air, and I starved her. The hum died. The room changed shape. I turned to the whistle man, and his mouth made a sorry. I put my hand on his shoulder and used him like a post to swing around, and I hit the helmet with a hammer, where the foam shows at the edge, and the plastic spidered, and the thing under it listed like a bad shelf. Kian locked down the counter aisle, like a right guard pulling on a trap play. The people under the benches didn't move. Garden District hummed a tune without words to keep the quiet together. It was a church song, I realized later, without the words because words make meaning and meaning invites volume. We pushed them to the east, into the loading bay, because the bay has a big door you can drop like a curtain and the air there tastes thin. Triage had taped 2 flashlights to mop handles, and she flicked them on and off irregularly in the corner of the bay to steer the ones who could still be steered. Every time a head started to map to that light, she changed the pattern or stopped entirely. We learned on our feet. We put 2 bodies in the bay and dropped the door and turned the latch that had rust on it and hoped the welds we couldn't see were good. The helmet man made a longer problem. He was faster. It is a terrible thing to admit that some of them are quicker than others. He moved like a man who never got tired running laps in high school and now had no reason to stop. I took a step, feinted with a hammer, and let him choose the bait. He went for my shoulders with both hands. I ducked and made a short swing into the side of his neck, not a decapitating blow. You don't get that in life without a tool you don't own, but a hit that made him stumble into the post. Kian finished it in the way you finish a job you don't want to do twice. I hate that we have a language for this now. The room settled back into diesel and breath. The people under the benches did not sit up until I told them to. I said, "No whistles. Ever." And the whistle man nodded and put his whistle into his pocket and then into a drawer under the ticket counter and shut it like he was turning a chapter on purpose. He is a good man, and later, when I write this in my head, I forgive him. But on the second night of chaos, when zombies are in your street and a depot is all the community you've got, forgiveness is a luxury like hot water. We didn't stay. That was our cost for the night. We couldn't use the depot anymore because the door was bent and the frame looked like a man's knee that had turned wrong on a jump. We could tape it and bar it and wedge it, but the wedge would fail if the weight shifted. The group decided to move at dawn. The roof collective up on the east side was a rumor. The church basement triage was full. The water treatment plant was defensible if we could stop the wrong people from opening the wrong valves. I said the plant because at least I had a map in my head and a smell I could use like a curtain. I said the plant because the hum was a friend if we made our friend and not our metronome. The whistle man said okay. Kian said he would drive. We put people on the bus in 10s, waited 3 minutes, put 10 more. We made our load in irregular on purpose. I watched the street, for heads cocking to the rhythm of our mistake. We drove by the big box store, and I memorized the back hall because I knew we might have to run it again. The bus turned near the downtown parking garage because I wanted to make a stop. It is a bad thing to do, to make a whole group bend for a man's errand, but I had a kid in the trunk and my son as my ledger. I would leave a group to get the one thing that gives me one more option later. We pulled into the garage. The alarm on the second floor had given up, and the silence made my teeth click. The 2 who had been there were gone. The fire door I had latched was open a handspan because someone had shoved a sneaker in it, and that sneaker now looked like it had been chewed. We made the move fast. I popped the trunk and grabbed the tarp, the bungees, the headlamp, and the socket set, because sometimes a door will let you through if you change its value with a new bolt. On the way back to the bus, something moved by the stair and made that wet slap sound, and I learned how heavy a tire iron feels when your friend is 20 feet away and your kid is looking at you through a bus window. Heavy enough to slow you if you let it. Light enough to throw. I didn't throw it. I don't throw tools. I went past the motion with my body low and my feet messy, so nothing could lock onto a rhythm, and I climbed onto the bus. And when the doors folded, the driver gave me a look that said he'd done me a favor, and I owed him one. He's right. He can collect later when we both have sleep again. At the plant, we made a fort out of catwalks and caged tanks and a load bay door that drops with a satisfying guillotine. We hung tarps not just as barriers, but as sound curtains. Chain link sings, tarps eat the song. We made a rule board. Lights inside only. No repetitive anything. No tapping your foot. No whistling. Garden District woman ran the south platform and made children stack plastic cups in towers and unstack them in chaos, so the sound would be like a brook instead of a drum. Red set up their table and told people to tell the truth about cuts. We made a policy. Some people would smell like chlorine and some would not. We'd rotate who went into the strong air, so no one's lungs had to carry it all day. I put bleach rags in sealable bags and told people to crack them only when they had to move past a tight space. It worked. For a while, they walked the perimeter outside the chain link and put their hands into the metal diamonds and moved their fingers like people remembering the piano. Some pressed their ears to the fence and listened to the hum in the steel like they could drink it. They didn't look inside. Not when we stayed irregular. Not when we made our arms move messy and our feet step with intent, but without pattern. I learned a little song to sing in my head that has no beat. It's just a series of stretches, and then a stop, and then a different stretch. It kept me from tapping. It kept my son from drumming his fingers. I told him this was like baseball, when the pitcher tries to mess your timing, and I asked him to show me how he adjusts. He did the thing with his hands where he waits longer and then goes all at once. I watched his shoulders. I didn't cry because he deserves a man who knows what to do with his tear ducts in the time he's given. We lasted another day in that plant, long enough to believe for a minute in the math we had made. Then people found us. I should say, other people. Not the zeros behind the fence, but the angry ones who needed a leader now that their old leader was dead under a tarp somewhere. They came with a truck that had a plow on the front and the word Judy painted on the blade like a prayer. They wanted our water, and they wanted Kian's strength and my hands and the whistleman's order. They had rules, which is a polite word for they had a man with a gun making other men stand behind him. They wore armbands too, red cloth torn from an old tablecloth. They had a whistle. They didn't know the rule about repetition. I did a thing I'm not proud of. I lied and said we had a sickness, and they didn't want our water. They didn't believe me because I was too clean and our kids were not coughing. One of them blew the whistle. 3 short, then 3 short again. My mouth filled with spit because my body thought the chlorine had come back for me. But it was fear. It has the same mouthfeel. We made a decision, finally, that we had been delaying because decisions make the night move forward. We closed the valves on the chlorine feed as far as we could, and we cracked the emergency purge for the smallest line. And we let a white bloom of gas roll out across the fence line, and we prayed we had read the wind right. The men with Judy stepped back. One dropped his gun and then remembered himself and picked it up and put a sleeve in front of his face like a cartoon. The zeros outside the fence turned their faces away from us toward the place where the gas was stronger. They slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. They pressed their hands to the fence and then forgot why they had put them there. Kian pulled the load bay door down, and the whistle man finally threw his whistle into the settling tank, because sometimes you do a thing that is too dramatic, and you deserve to forgive yourself for it, because you needed the motion. Garden District woman gathered the kids. Triage taped the last clean filters over the vents. I stood next to the purge valve, and put my hand on the wheel, and felt it vibrate with a story I maybe did not own. The title line in my head had been a TV crawl out there that first night. First night of chaos. Zombies are in your street, but here, with a hand on an industrial wheel that could do too much too fast, it came back with a new meaning. This isn't just a night anymore. It's the first page of a job you didn't ask for. And the street is the inside of your house now, unless you make a new house out of a place that was supposed to be for machines. The plant's hum was lower with the feed down, and I could hear the river proper. And somewhere a car alarm started up, and then failed, and then came back steady. And I hated it because it would pull things like the moon pulls water. We could open the purge and flood the fence line, and buy ourselves a long hour in which to move downriver along the catwalks, across the maintenance bridge, to the back of the community garden, where the chain link sound curtains flutter under the highway. We could get into the parking garage stair and throw car alarms in the opposite corner, and then cross over to the rooftop motel at the edge of the cloverleaf, and pray its failing generator would give us the hum we needed to walk past the wind-whipped signage without drawing a crowd. Or we could stay and try to make the plant a home and teach people to never, ever, ever count to 60 out loud while they work. I turned the wheel a quarter turn and heard the hiss grow. I thought about my lungs, about my sons, about the woman with the red band who doesn't sleep, about Kian's shoulders, and how he would hold a door while children went by. I thought about the man with the armband and the plow, and how much he needed there to be a rule he could enforce. I thought about debt in my knee, and the way the bathtub drain in our apartment makes a small, regular click when it's almost empty. I thought about how I will rip that stopper out if I ever get home, just for the joy of making something quiet again. I squeezed my hand on the wheel until my knuckles went white, and the sound of gas became the only line in the room. If we flood the air more, we'll be able to walk the outside edges and take the kids out under a cloud that hides our carbon and our panic. If we flood the air more, someone will cough too hard and not stop. If we flood the air more, the men with Judy will put their sleeves down and think they can run through it, and they will. And it will be worse at the next fence line. If we don't, the whistle will shape our night, and the zeros will find a beat in our bodies. I looked at Malik. He looked at me like I'm his map. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying, because he knows I need to believe that I can still teach him something. The title line rolled by one more time on the bottom of my mind, but it wasn't a TV ticker now. It was the sentence I would say if I needed him to know what mattered. First night of chaos. Zombies are in your street. The first night is almost done. The street is here, running through us, through this plant, through our choices. I didn't say it out loud. I said, we move. And I turned the wheel another quarter. The hiss became a long exhale. The fence line blurred. Kian's hand found the low door cable. Garden District already had the kids up, messy. Not in a line, never in a line. Triage put a rag into my hand that was wet and smelled like a pool and a hospital and a lie. The whistle man took his whistle out of his pocket, looked at it, and put it down on the concrete and stepped on it until it cracked. And then he picked up the pieces and put them in his other pocket, like he thought maybe he would need reminders of this lesson later. The men with Judy had their sleeves over their faces. They could run forward and force our door. They could run backward and find a way around. The zeros pressed against the fence and then forgot what they were doing and rubbed their faces with their palms until they had nothing left to express disgust with. The gas cleared a narrow path I didn't trust and a wider one that was too much like a promise. My fingers tightened and slid on the wheel because my gloves were slick and my pride did not want to ask for help. Malik coughed once and then stared at me with the anger of a boy who has decided he will follow you even when he hates the terrain. We had choices, all of them bad, none of them finally worse than the others until a body counts the cost. If I opened the purge 2 more turns, the path would be clear enough for even the slowest to move. If I shut it, we would have to fight through a room full of sound and a day full of men who think a whistle will keep their hands clean. My knee hurt. I said now. And my hand stayed on the wheel and the hiss got louder and I prayed the wind would stay with us. I stepped backward into the cloud because it is better to make your own darkness than to wait for someone else's, and I counted irregular, in my head, the way we learned. We moved. Whether we make it across that catwalk around the settling tanks and into the chain link echo of the community garden, or whether we cough and sit and learn the limits of our lungs is, at the moment I'm telling this, not yet decided. But this is the first night, and the street is where we stand, and I have my son's hand hooked into the back of my jacket like he did at the stair, and I have my tools and my map, and a pair of rules I trusted just enough to bet on. The wheel under my fingers is turning. The hiss is a line we follow not because it is safe, but because, for now, it is ours.